Words that rhymed with another word. So I'd say
I'm nervous.
It's okay to be nervous on your first.
hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. Now, this morning the spotlight is on the future of journalism. We unpack a series of events that have been taking place looking at the future of journalism, hosted by Media Monitoring Africa and the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg with the German Embassy, where they've been discussing various issues such as sustainability and the financing of journalism and media credibility, amongst other issues. Now, a sector in crisis, that's something to look forward to. Stay tuned for that and much more. We'll also be taking a look at the current state and future challenges of an old medium and perhaps still the most popular, and that's radio, the changing face of radio. And we'll be chatting to some voice that you will remember and a face that you will know because he spent many years here at the SABC. So do you think radio journalism will survive in the digital age with the fourth industrial revolution taking over? And of course we have our regular features, our international editor. We're hoping to cross to Accra in Ghana today, and that's a country where lots of papers are on the streets every single day. And of course we'll be taking you back in history a little bit later in the show, find out what year and what the issue was in that particular year. And don't forget, you can always engage with us on social media. Please use the hashtag SABC Media Monitor. We'd love to hear from you. Now, before we unpack all of these stories, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers today. And we start with the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times, that's leading with a story that embattled Democratic Alliance leader Mmusi Maimane apparently received a delegation of senior party figures, including former leader Tony Leon and other members of a panel set up to review the party's performance in the general elections. And it's alleged that Maimane has been asked to quit in the interests of the party. The City Press is also leading with a story about the DA, talking about the party heading for a divisive and likely damaging showdown as pressure mounts for Maimane to quit. This is Helen Zille this week surprised South Africa by announcing that she'll be contesting the position of the held by the outgoing federal chairperson James Self. The Sunday Independent, let's take a look at that. Well, that's also making the DA front page news, with an angle suggesting that Mmusi Maimane's supporters feel that right-wing elements within the party are trying to oust Maimane as a party leader. Now, the report says that leaders, including Joburg Mayor Herman Mashaba, say that elements within the party have been orchestrating a smear campaign against Maimane. Not surprising, the Weekend Argus on Sunday is also leading with a similar theme. The DA seemingly at war with itself, with the party leader as the focus of the battle over the fight for control of the party. So that's going to be a big story during the course of this week. Now, the Sunday Tribune is running with the same story. Its front page talking about how Maimane supporters say that the party leader is being forced out by a group of mainly white leaders for championing redress policies needed to fast-track economic transformation in the country. Okay, the Sunday World, that's lead story there involves radio personality DJ Euphonic, who seems to be in a legal jam. SARS is taking him to court after his company failed to settle a 4 million rand of a 9.8 million rand tax bill. Wow. Okay, that's the Sunday World. All right, so those are your newspapers, and we'll be taking a look at those again a little bit later on in the program. But most young people are focused on social media, and let's take a look and see what's trending on social media today. And there's New Zealand versus Namibia. That's the #1 trend at the moment. Of course, they're playing at the Rugby World Cup, and needless to say, unfortunately, Namibia have been feeling a torrent of tries against them. But I suppose playing and appearing is the big story there. So Namibia versus New Zealand, I think the match is probably over now. We'll give you an update on that score, but at half time it was something like 52-9 was the score at that stage. So 52-27 apparently. All right, we'll get a final score for you in a short while. So that's what's trending. And also someone called Kiabatswe. If you're on Twitter and you know South Africa well, she's apparently wished herself happy birthday. And they're quite surprised that she says she's 19. You make up your own mind on those issues. Okay, so there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors. Let's say a warm welcome to Siyabonga Africa, who's a program officer at South Africa Media Innovation Program, and William Bird, director at Media Monitoring Africa. To my guests, a very good morning. Give us a wave. Good morning. There you go. We'll be chatting to them in a short while. Now, over the past few years, the face of journalism has been changing in a major and fairly dramatic way. The advent of the digital era and the fourth industrial revolution have been major disruptors in the way that journalism is done, and indeed what it will look like in the years ahead. This has and will affect all traditional media platforms and the practice of journalism. One of these platforms is radio. And we caught up with some future journalists who are currently students at Damelin to find out what they thought about the future of radio journalism in particular and its challenges.
I feel like, well, with radio journalism, there aren't any pictures. So it's up to you as the presenter to be able to sell your story. So if I'm boring in radio, then no one's going to tune in. So I must be able to give you like a mental picture of what I'm saying. So if I'm talking about the tape capture, you must try and picture maybe Jacob Zuma sitting there being interviewed, cameras all around. So yeah, basically I feel like that's how, and I don't think it would die anytime soon, because it's very different from television.
Like he said, we can't compare radio to TV, because mostly when it comes to TV, people concentrate on the person's image and what they see, and on radio you have to sell your story and make sure that people understand what you're saying from the side of the side of the mic. And when people are listening to you, you should make sure that you give them relevant information and what they need to know at that certain point. So when it comes to radio journalism, I also don't think it would die anytime soon.
I agree with both of them, and it also depends on how you tell your story. You know, if you work on radio, you need to grab your audience attention based on how you tell your story. It's not always about what the story is about, but it's also about how you tell your story. Are you able to grab your audience attention?
So that's a student view, and now to a person who's been a career radio and television broadcaster. Now, most people will have heard him for many, many years as a radio anchor on the SABC's SAFM and also on our television screens. He's seen the changes over the years, and as a digital content creator, he also understands what lies ahead. Well, joining me now is Ashraf Garda, who's the chief driver of Champion South Africa. Ashraf, always good to chat to you.
Absolutely.
And I never thought we'd ever get this opportunity.
Well, I interviewed you, but this is on the other side.
We turned it around today.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, you've been radio. This is a game that you know well, and you've seen the changes over time. And I just wonder if you could perhaps just track for us what you have seen change before we start looking at what lies ahead.
I think that the key thing that has changed is the onset of social media, and certainly in recent times the digital content creation. So outside of typical television. They've posed alternatives for people watching you and I right now, and certainly on radio. And how radio has had to challenge that or to fight against it or to embrace it is the key change. And I think it's a lot more that will continue.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we started to see is whilst you're on air, before all you heard was your voice, but now you've got a Facebook page that's live, you've got a Twitter page that's live, you've got all sorts of other media that's running at the same time.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's this convergence, right?
Yeah.
And I've made the point before. You can't, if you're a presenter, you can't have your right-hand man or woman, your producer who doesn't understand social media, because they absolutely fit in, hand in glove, and they need to do that. But linked to that is, well, one is your ability to handle multiple platforms at the same time, which we all do. But the other is instant responses. Yeah. So this notion of, you have a show and then maybe a week later somebody will send you not even an email, a letter by post. It's out. It's absolutely instant, whether they give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The responses are immediate, and therefore you need to be quick on the take in terms of how you respond to the responses or how you preempt them.
Has the way we listen to radio changed? I mean, I remember, when I was young, I was so excited when I got a little transistor radio for my birthday, and you had to turn a dial to tune in and try and get the station right. That's changed quite a bit over time.
I think it has. I mean, I certainly have a home office, right? Yeah. And certainly the major part of the morning, if I'm not driving, I would listen literally on radio. Yeah. But if I'm at home and I'm listening to radio, it's very much off my iPad, genuinely. So I would go to multiple channels, live streaming, hop between different channels and see what I enjoy, radio stations. I think that's an audience that radio stations don't often consider as an audience. But I think they're a significant audience with significant spend listening on an unusual, not native channel.
Has that changed the way we consume radio, though, in the sense not so much just the platform, but how we sit down and listen? Before, you could sit down at your desk and have the radio on the whole time. If you're listening on your phone, there's data issues that come into play now. Has that changed the listening patterns?
Well, I think it would. I mean, I can give you, so my example I've just given you, I think many others may be in the same boat. It would change the patterns, but very importantly, and if I can just, in terms of your preview, you had these student of journalism, right? I'm suggesting even now as I sit here, seasoned broadcaster, but a student of journalism all the same, meaning we need to be learning and we need to be seeing what the younger people are doing, because if you're not learning from the major, disruptors in the world, then we'd be on the wrong side. What's key, I think, in terms of how we consume it, but also how we promote it, right? Yeah. In the past, I don't know, a few years ago, if you use social media as a means of promoting your show, it's like, why you want to do that? You're competing with other people. The reality is, more often than not, right, somebody would be watching a tweet of mine or yours saying, hey, so-and-so is going to be on a show. It's like, I need to listen. And whether that's radio or TV, I don't know. I think what's key for radio is, and social media, the link, is the ability to quote quotes on air, played out on social media, which then turns out to be a major driver of the audience to the actual platform. So they're not a threat, they very much complement each other.
So let's talk about the journalism now. So it used to be, again, a reporter goes out onto the street with a little Marantz microphone and a little pack with batteries, goes out, does a story, captures some sounds and comes back. That will continue, I'm sure, but they are now having to add more elements to that, and that is the social media and all of this other content.
Absolutely. So, this idea of just having your little phone and say that's just for pictures, I mean, they're fun, right? But no, I know I've done it already in the past, taken lots of, and now people are doing it, taking video content at a live conference. Even if that doesn't carry off live on your shows or radio or TV, you take video clips and then tease that content along. Now, I'm saying you're going to get far more of that because, as you know, social media is pushing, or the platforms are pushing video content higher than simply text, because there's data usage issues around that. So the point is, if you're a budding journalist and you're linear in your thinking to say, I only do radio, I think you're on the wrong path. Similarly, if you say, I only do TV, you're on the wrong path, or I don't like social media. I think every one of them is going to complement each other. And perhaps the best example of that is, the rugby player there was this big issue from the South African player who was on the wrong side of the celebration, so to speak, right? Yeah. And how did he respond? by his social media clip, which means whoever advised him, rightly or wrongly, they understood that that driver would get to your audience as quick as possible. If we don't embrace that, we're going to find ourselves shortchanged.
Again, this, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, the social media aspect now, is that affecting the journalist in that the stories that he would chase are now being driven by what's in the social media scape, or are we still able to influence to such a degree that it perhaps becomes part of the social media escape?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, look, I can speak, a radio DJ and a breakfast host versus a talk show are very different animals, right? So from my experience as a talk show host, right, I don't think they're in competition. I think that you're always going to get a situation where people will still listen to radio, because I think the familiarity with the host is now more important than before. There was this feeling in the past to say, well, don't build up the individual within the brand. What happens when he or she leaves? I'm saying that's a management problem that they must face, right? The reality is, in the age of technology, where everything is data-driven, the familiar voice is even more important on the one hand. On the other hand, in terms of getting the story right, yes, there are examples, and there are many, where citizen journalists can go out, take a picture and post it. It doesn't mean it's always right. You still have to verify it. I think there's a greater danger now, or a need to verify than ever before. I mean, we all probably get sent things on WhatsApp groups all the time. It's like, we need to check it out. What I think it has done, sometimes it has broken news by citizens, and they've got it spot on. What it's given us is a greater responsibility, being anchors, to make sure that if we're not first with the story, we better get the investigative backstory around it far better than we've ever done before. Simply saying, there's an accident on the street is really not good enough.
Is there a future for radio journalism, given the power of social media, given the growing cheapness of the digital platforms? Will we, in 10 years' time, be listening to radio and looking for a news story?
Well, I'm certainly not Nostradamus. I don't even look like him, I think, right? So who knows, okay? But I will say this much. There was this theory before video killed the radio star. It didn't quite happen. And therefore, digital content, will it kill the radio star? I don't think so. But what's very important, maybe that point that you asked, is there a future in radio journalism? You may not have that question anymore, because what I'm saying is, this radio journalist may not be a radio journalist as you know it. The ability to multitask. So when you say, I'm a journalist or a broadcaster, simultaneously you'll be doing it on 3-4 different platforms, and it will be a given that you can handle all those platforms, as opposed to one linear, I only do this.
All right, Ashraf, I wish I could chat to you for a long time, but we certainly need to have a cup of coffee soon. But thanks so much indeed for coming through.
Great to be on the show.
Fantastic. All right, that was Ashraf Garda giving us a take on radio, what it looks like, and perhaps what lies ahead, and the merging of these skills on various platforms. We'll continue to explore the future of journalism right after this. Stay with us.
It's okay to be nervous on your first day, but you'll make lots of friends, and I'll be here when you get back. With iWise Life Insurance, I provide for my family.
Get 1 million Rand cover from just 189 Rand per month with iWise Life Insurance. For a quote, SMS Live to 48853.
The fact that I got shot in Lavendale was the turning point for me.
Those people won't get the message that we really want to say, enough is enough.
When I took 30K, I wanted to invest it in Forex.
If you're using foreign exchange just to try and make money, you're essentially gambling.
If I had a recipe to constantly make money on every single trade, why would I want to sell that?
This guy signed, he produced the fraudulent the pay slips. This is the ID copy he used. This is not me.
This bogus doctor was busy performing an illegal abortion. From the outside it all looks authentic, but when you look closely, it's a scam.
After all the media noise and everything, they know me.
Special assignment, Sunday at 9:30 on SABC News.
Coletta Johi for SABC News in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Leon Sanyange, SABC News, Entebbe, Uganda. Chris Ochamringa, SABC News, Beni, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Sarah Kemani for SABC News in Accra, Ghana.
Phil Ihaza, SABC News, Abuja. Daniel Kijo, SABC, Dar es Salaam.
My name is Sergeant Major Conaway. I choose yellow as a sign that I'm feeling opportunistic towards South Africa.
My name is Kassaundorana and I'm from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. I came to South Africa in 2001. We're going to give the political landscape and system of South Africa 3 because we are still the best in the continent.
Ik wil worden aquí voor die land dat moet recht komen nog.
Out of these three, I choose red. Our government is under danger. Corruption, unemployment, youth unemployment, water crisis. We are in trouble.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor now. Before the break, we discussed the future of radio journalism. And now we'll delve into what lies ahead for journalism in general. Now, this is inspired by a series of public events organized by Media Monitoring Africa with the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg as well as the German Embassy, looking at what the future of journalism might look like. Now, the series looks at different aspects of that journalism journey, from media credibility to one of the latest events that focused on financing and the sustainability of the profession. Let's hear what some of the guest speakers had to say about those challenges.
One of the problems with heavily relying on advertising is the fact that even though your advertising sector may not dictate what you do, there is a tendency to want to lean towards what they prefer in the way you produce your content, because it assists you to generate revenue. They may not dictate, but because you know that you will get the money that you want if you sort of gear your programming towards what they are looking for. And it's a huge problem.
Now I feel like I'm giving a lecture. How the sector should work, how it was initially supposed to work, is that the Big Four were supposed to contribute to the Media Diversity and Development Agency. So they were supposed to give certain funds to the agency so that grassroots, community, independent publishers benefit from that fund. And MDDA has said publicly that they are struggling to get that money. And we know why they're struggling to get that money. They too are not innocent. You know, I think the big players are saying we can't give money to an organization that has not gotten a clean audit.
We in Germany we struggle with our public broadcasters a lot, but this is, on a very high level. And we are, in Germany, it's the opposite round. So we have 3% probably advertising revenue in public broadcasters, and people want to get even rid of that.
All right, so that was just a few of the speakers there sharing their thoughts about some of the issues that the future of journalism is going to have to deal with, overcome, and perhaps adapt to going forward. Well, let's chat to our guest editors now about some of these issues. And I'm going to start with you, William, because Media Monitoring Africa put this together by and large, and I just wonder why.
So there are a number of reasons. I think that our media sector is broadly in crisis, and often we see these things when media people make the headlines for very often the wrong reasons, or we hear about the SABC's financial crisis, and that what we'd failed to do within media ourselves is bring the public with us and sort of explain what some of the big issues are. So we thought we needed to have a series of open public events with people who are engaged in dialogue and bring in a couple of experts and bring in an international expert so that we see that it's not just us that's going through these same things, but it also helps with an international perspective, and then look at what the things are on. So we looked at the series and we said, well, one of the big issues obviously was around or still is around credibility, and try and unpack what some of the big challenges are there and what's being done about it. So we've got a fairly positive focus on it. And then the second one was on financial sustainability broadly, and looking at what people are doing, and there's some really exciting, innovative things, and Sia, I'm sure we'll talk about those in a moment. And then the third one that we're doing for this year is looking at future of TV and audio visual, and how do we retain our identity and local content, and what is the impact of that for news as we move into a digital environment.
Do you think that the conversations have brought some clarity about what's coming, or do we kind of just say, look, the technology is moving at such a rate that we can only guess?
So it has and it hasn't. I think that we don't know what's going to happen, but I think that what these things do offer is that it's not a hopeless scenario, and it's not like we don't know what we're doing and we're sitting there fumbling around in the dark. We've got amazing, brilliant people in this country doing incredible things with very little resources, sometimes with more resources, but you can see that there's a lot of pathways that we can take, some of them that we are doing that are very exciting and innovative, rebuilding journalism credibility, those kinds of things, and looking at other alternative sustainability models. So there really is a lot going on. I think what these things serve to do is say, these aren't offering all the answers by even a long stretch. This is the start of a number of conversations, but what they do point to is that things are exciting and innovative if we look towards that with that kind of a frame, instead of thinking, oh, it's all a disaster.
Or is there any big theme that's you've seen, or a thread that's starting to come through when you look at all of the media in its totality?
Change, disruption of an order that we haven't begun to imagine, really, and that can be very positive, and it can also be disastrous, and so that with that change is that significant level of uncertainty. People don't know, so there's a lot of exciting things, positive things, and there's also a lot of worrying things about where things could go.
All right, so worrying things now. Sia, I'm going to come to you now, but before that, what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask, we went to those students again to ask them what they thought the future lies ahead, because they're the ones that are going to spend their time in that future. And this is what they said to us.
Anyone can be a journalist because there's citizen journalism, and people can take videos and make news out of actually being in the area and finding out on what's happening. So when it comes to the media and journalism growing in the near future, I don't think it's going to grow. People are going to be more focused on social media, not the news.
So are you not worried?
I am worried because I'm a journalism student.
It's important for us as journalists to be there, but then at the same time I feel like social media is taking over, and I feel like the more social media platforms they introduce, the less journalists there will be in the field, because people are more reliant on social media as opposed to watching news.
Sometimes if you look at the news in general, sometimes it becomes boring because anywhere you look it's like the same, understand? So yeah, I think it's a 50-50, but it's very tough to say, well, kill the profession. I think maybe try and change it a bit.
Okay, so young people have a view, and this is the world that they are living in and about to become part of.
Yeah.
And your program was set up specifically with innovation in mind. So you kind of had to, just as a starting point, sit in the future. What are you seeing?
We're seeing definitely, like what William was saying, we're seeing a lot of change, a lot of disruption, and a lot of experimentation. I think that's part of the excitement of being in the space, is that we get to see what people are doing in the innovation side of journalism, which can be very encouraging, because we're seeing people experimenting with memberships, we're seeing people experiment with business models that are varying, which is really good, because what we've done in the past is focusing on ad-supported journalism, which is not really sustainable. So now that we're heading into a future where it's we're looking at different types of business models, different types of revenue streams, I think that's where the future of journalism lies. So it's a very interesting space to be in, where we're seeing just where journalism is in flux.
Yeah. So one of the students there talked about how journalism can be boring. Is that part of the innovation that needs to happen, actually, that it needs to be presented in a different way?
Yeah, so one of the focus areas of our program is digital native products. And one of our grantees is the Season for Walsh Experience. I don't know if you know of that. It's the first WhatsApp news channels. They are marketed, and it's this young man, Season for Walsh, who's a rising star in political opinion. And they are running this news channel via WhatsApp. They share links. They actually started a podcast series as well. And they are basically, trying to speak the language of the youth in the way that they present the news, and it's much more engaging, which is something that's really important, is trying to get that engagement level up. So what that student was speaking to in terms of just the homogeneity of news is really true. We are struggling with presenting a product that's pretty much the same across the board, whichever publisher you look at. So when you start actually changing the product and changing the way it's presented, you start to see much better results.
All right, so William, I'm old school, and I don't know if you're the same, but I still love picking up newspapers and turning pages. Are we a dying breed, or what's the deal?
I fear we may be. We've been doing some lectures to some university students throughout this week, and in fact, very few of them read newspapers, but they do, fortunately, still consume news. Of course, it's on their mobile device. So I don't think that's going to decrease. If anything, in fact, the excitement for us is that the importance of journalism now is greater than it's ever been in our society. It's no longer just a thing to hold the powerful to account. It's a clear, unambiguous pillar of democracy, that without quality, credible journalism, you cannot have a democracy, which means you have to have journalism. So do these things need to change? Yes, of course they do, and they'll shift around. I mean, the interesting thing is we say these things are the same. If you look at today's headlines, across the media, it's all about the DA, it's a disaster, right? Yeah. That isn't where the difference and the nuance lies. They're using those things as the headline grabbers, and yet once you start going into each of our dailies today, or our weeklies mostly, and you start looking beyond those first headline items, you'll find that we've got an incredible range of news stories that is happening just today that is really exciting, actually. And it's about, I guess, trying to find ways of making sure that those things gain traction in different social media, and we've got to also look at shifting how social media operates. I mean, we've got the threat of mis and disinformation, and of course the power of social media giants themselves.
So, I mean, we use this word journalism, and you say that it's important now more than ever. And I'm just wondering, in the future, given the shifts and the things will it still be called journalism, or will it have another name just because it's being done in such different ways? And now, as that young girl said, that anybody can be a storyteller.
I'd like to counter that statement and say that anyone can be a content producer, but not anyone can be a journalist. I mean, you can be trained to become a journalist in the long run, but the craft of journalism itself is something that's learned and passed on across academia, in the newsrooms, and like William was saying, it's something that's much needed today, because it incorporates analysis, it incorporates storytelling. It's actually going in and writing, producing content in such a way that it explains the issue.
Do the consumers, and they're young people now, do they have time to read a piece of 500 words? And that's not even very long, but for them, that's an age. If they can get it in 140 characters from influencers.
Well, I mean, okay, so an influencer creates, post, so can a newsroom on Twitter as well. I mean, the platform, the medium is the message, it's going to, of course, journalism will have to adapt to the different mediums that now are available to it. Now newsrooms are looking at TikTok, which is the short form video platform as well. They're looking at Instagram as well. I mean, years ago, you wouldn't have guessed that they'd have to actually do that. So it's all about, how we adapt to the platforms, but still present our journalism in such a way that, it takes advantage of the payoffs that are available there.
Your take on that, William?
So I mean, you can get a sense of what a story is about in 20 seconds. That's why you have headlines. That's not actually anything different. If you want to understand what's going on, you have to either listen to some people having a conversation about it that know what they're talking about, hopefully, or read a longer piece of format journalism. Those things aren't going to change too much, I don't think. So it is about just putting it in a means and a mechanism, but also helping people understand why these things actually matter to them in a democracy, and also showing the distinction between SABC as against someone who calls themselves, I'm a journalist on TikTok, right? The point is that SABC subscribes to a whole series of editorial policies. There's a whole lot of processes, so that if SABC does decide to open its own TikTok channel, you can probably assume that the information there, you can assume, is that it's going to be accurate and reliable, as opposed to William deciding to put up a TikTok channel about whatever I think is interesting, because I don't have to adhere to the same standards and ethical codes of conduct. And of course, media get these things wrong, yes, but overwhelmingly, the role that media fulfill in offering and providing credible, reliable information is becoming increasingly important, precisely because anyone with a camera can put up something and put out a story. And Ashraf referred to that incident earlier with the rugby, how you take a piece of footage, you take it out of context and it looks like one thing. You then need a journalist to come in and say, well, actually, this is the full story and this is really what happened.
Do you think that, and I don't know, this might sound a bit condescending, but do you think that there's enough patience, sophistication to actually wade through all the noise and decide what is good journalism and what isn't? I look at what happened with the xenophobic attacks recently, and there were pictures that were floating around. And, if you just spend a second looking at the image, you can tell this isn't even South Africa. This is Congo or somewhere. And I get a sense sometimes that people are just too lazy to think through what they're seeing.
News consumers are definitely in need of explaining, and that's where the opportunities lie. Is in new forms of journalism like explainer journalism, fact checking, which is something we've been doing anyways, but it's growing in prominence. And so we're getting projects like What's Crap on WhatsApp, which is a project that's run by one of my grantees, Volume and Africa Check, where they actually produce a podcast specifically for WhatsApp to debunk myths that are basically being spread on WhatsApp itself. So it's about looking for the opportunities to actually explain to the news consumer what the issues are about, what they're seeing, whether it's real or not, or if it needs further context in order for people to get a better idea of what's going on.
All right, so perhaps it's just the final thought. You've got this last one coming up, the future of television. What do you think is going to come out of that? Because one of the things that I've already started seeing and shifting, I spent a bit of time in the UK. I bought a television, but I can count the number of times on one hand, the actual times I watched television on my TV. I was watching it on something called an iPlayer on my computer, and it was at times that suited me. And it used to be everyone was at home at 8 o'clock to catch the news at that moment. And that whole thing has changed now. I mean, we don't even know what prime time is anymore.
Well, exactly, and it's terrifying but also exciting, because it presents opportunities and real challenges for public broadcasters and public media to say, how do we get our content to people in a way that, and it means they're going to have to choose that over one of their favorite series. And who's producing that favorite series? Is it, and then are we competing with the South African series? Are we competing with an international series? And what does that mean for our understanding of our world and our news and our journalism? How do we make sure that people retain some level of interest and engagement with what's happening in our politics? Because frankly, when you look at these things, you think, okay, you people need to go into a playpen, and we'll leave you once you've grown up, and then we can come and engage with you as adults.
WhatsApp news channels, my fear is they're not regulated, and anything can come out of that kind of thing. Is that not a concern for you?
I mean, definitely dark social, which is, social platforms which cannot be, measured or they definitely are areas that we have to be concerned over. But at the same time, you have to look at the institution itself and the rules that it prescribes to. And so if you prescribe to the journalism rules as set by the South African National Editors Forum, I think that's, a step forward in terms of, making sure that the content producer is creating content that is credible itself.
All right, fascinating. And, 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have even been having this conversation because we just didn't know what was coming. But it's coming, and it's coming really fast. But we'll chat a bit more and get a sense of what's happening around the continent and other parts of the world after this. Stay with us if you're watching at home right now.
What should you do to avoid getting ill?
Eat healthy, not to do drugs, not to smoke.
To learn more about some of the most common illnesses and how to avoid them, join Dr. Silomo Daung each week and get all your health questions answered by experts.
What are those signs that people should look out for and say, this is time for me to go and seek help?
It is very important to identify and address those problems as early as possible.
You are a fighter, you are a warrior, and you will get better.
Right here on Health Talk.
Coletta Njohi for SABC News in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Leon Sanyange, SABC News, Entebbe, Uganda.
Chris Ochamringa, SABC News, Beni, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Sarah Kemani for SABC News in Accra, Ghana.
Phil Ihaza, SABC News, Abuja. Daniel Kijo, SABC, Dar es Salaam.
Tammy, do you feel vindicated?
We've been making the noise, I think, for the past 2 decades.
Please just unpack that statement for us.
Essentially, I said that there is enough evidence, but we don't need to have another commissioning inquiry.
Now we need to do something, especially incorporating men into this conversation.
Correct. We are beneficiaries of this patriarchal system, which puts us as men on top of the social hierarchy and puts women at the bottom.
What do you want to say about men in leadership in South Africa?
It's very important that men in leadership become part of the conversation. That is why in our work we want peer-to-peer conversations so that CEO can call out another CEO, chairman can call another chairman.
People want to know where to from here.
I think South Africans should take a lot of comfort from the fact that someone who's been accused of corruption, someone under whose leadership service delivery has dropped, has now been fired.
Right, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and what we're going to start doing now is taking a look at the newspapers in a short while and speaking hopefully to our international editor from Ghana. But what we thought we'd do as well is take a look at other stories that have been pretty big here at home and in other parts of the world in the past week. And we start here at home. The Sunday Times associate editor Ranjeni Munsami, who's denied the latest allegations made against her at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, where police whistleblower Dhananjaya Naidu alleged that several journalists, including Munsami, were paid by crime intelligence. Speaking to News 24, Munsami refuted Naidu's assertions, saying that they are baseless and that she has never been in the pay of crime intelligence, whether as a journalist or otherwise. And she says that the accusations are an attempt to destroy her credibility, to ensure that she would not be taken seriously as a journalist within the with professionalism, independence and integrity. Now, here's an interesting story. Chinese journalists will soon have to pass a government test on Marxism and President Xi Jinping to be granted press passes. In order to receive updated press passes, more than 10,000 reporters and editors will have to pass a test on Marxism and the country's president. Now, the South China Morning Post is reporting that a notice was sent out from the country's media oversight office, some call it the propaganda office, saying that tests will be conducted through an app. Now, this app was created to educate Chinese citizens on the president's political philosophy, and it aggregates favorable articles, news clips and documentaries. Journalists are required to register with this app. You can't make this stuff up. Now, President Donald Trump on Wednesday denounced an impeachment inquiry into his July telephone call with Ukraine's leader, as Democratic lawmakers said that they would subpoena the White House records about the phone calls. At a joint news conference with Finland's president, Donald Trump blasted reporters, surprise, surprise, who asked about the probe, which he called a hoax, a fraud, he said. But he said that he would cooperate with the inquiry. This is Donald Trump at his best.
Ask a question, please.
Thank you, sir.
What about Mr. Biden? What did you want about Biden? What did you want him to look into on Biden? Look, Biden and his son are stone cold crooked, and you know it. His son walks out with millions of dollars. The kid knows nothing. You know it, and so do we. Go ahead, ask a question.
But the question, sir, was what did you want President Zelensky to do about Vice President Biden and his son Hunter?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, it was just a follow-up of what I just asked you,
Listen,
sir.
You ready? We have the president of Finland. Ask him a question.
I have one for him. I just wanted to follow up on the one that I asked.
Did you hear
what
me?
Did you want
Did you
him
hear
to
me?
Yes,
ask
sir.
him a question.
I will, but
I've given you a long answer. Ask this gentleman a question. Don't be rude.
No, sir, I don't want to be rude. I just wanted you to have a chance to answer the question that I asked you.
I've answered everything. It's a whole hoax. And you know who's playing into the hoax? People like you and the fake news media that we have in this country. And I say in many cases, the corrupt media, because you're corrupt. Much of the media in this country is not just fake, it's corrupt. And you have some very fine people, too. Great journalists, great reporters. But to a large extent, it's corrupt and it's fake. Ask the president of Finland a question, please.
Okay, I'll move on now.
All right. Okay. So then we could actually laugh at this because there's some part of it that is quite humorous. But actually, gentlemen, this is pretty serious because this is a man who's actually campaigning. And if people don't realize that that's what he's doing, it's quite dangerous. And my fear is the people, citizens, are being told that serious journalists are fake news and that he points people to certain news outlets. And this is pretty dangerous, isn't it? Yep. And it talks to this whole thing that Ranjani is dealing with, is about what she says is an attack on my integrity, my professionalism, because in the end, journalists, that's the only currency that we're going to have, isn't it?
Yep.
You take that away and that's it, our careers are done. Sia?
Indeed. I mean, we're seeing sustained attacks on the Fourth Estate, especially attacks on the credibility of journalists, which has had an impact on just how news consumers see the Fourth Estate and how they, value the product itself. So the more we lose our credibility, the less people trust us, the less they want to go and, either pay for news or even just consume news going onto the website. So it's definitely a worrying situation because the more the likes of Trump delegitimize news, the more it has an impact on our sustainability, basically.
Gosh, and then China. I mean, can you believe that?
I can.
It is surprising and it isn't. And I guess, and we also saw Singapore pass their so-called fake news thing. And it's, people that are wanting to censor the media like the term fake news. Yeah. We don't use it because it's not accurate. It's talk about mis and disinformation, fine, but not about that term. That's used for clear, overt political aims and agendas. So China, it's not that surprising that they would seek to do that. A number of countries on our continent seek to, impose similar ideas where unless you know this, you can't be registered as a journalist. And partly it's an understandable response to saying, how on earth do we control this flood of information that's out there? It's why Donald Trump uses that all-encompassing trope against anything that vaguely tallies with reality. He calls that fake news, right? And that's their way of dealing with the fact that they can't control all of those agendas, and they're now trying to seek to control it in a different way.
All right, okay, interesting takes on what we've just seen. But now it's time for us to go into our news archives, and this is where we go back to a year in history. And today we go back to 1996, 2 years into our democratic project, and there were a number of issues and challenges that needed to be addressed, and one of them were the needs of the blind and partially sighted persons. Now, this week in that year, the Johannesburg Society for the Blind was facing an imminent shutdown because government had plans to stop their subsidies.
The lives of nearly 200 people could be totally shattered within the next few years. The Johannesburg Society for the Blind faces an imminent shutdown because its main financier, the government, plans to stop subsidizing it. This means that many blind and visually impaired people who depend on the society for their livelihood could be left destitute. Maureen Mundia reports.
Carly van Fake has been working and living at the Johannesburg Society for the Blind for almost 10 years. He became visually impaired after trying to change a car tire, which then burst and affected his sight.
I'm here for 10 years. I'm working in a workshop during the day.
What do you do then?
Packing and assembly work. Well, as long as I can, I will try to be in the workshop. But if it will come to that point, then I will volunteer for retrenching.
Kali is among several other visually impaired who depend on the society. At this building in Johannesburg, hundreds are helped each year through services such as counseling and braille instruction. Full-time employment is also offered in fields like carpentry, caned furniture, house ornaments, furniture repairs, as well as weaving baskets. The items are sold to Pick and Pay supermarkets. The other outlet is a tuck shop situated within the building. Some get a weekly income of 93 rands. The premises also accommodate some of its blind workers like Kali van Fake. They could be left homeless if the society closed down.
There are various reasons for this closure. The first one is government subsidies are being phased out. And by the year 2000, the Johannesburg Society for the Blind will not get any assistance from government. The other is the impact of the current economic situation in this country. People don't donate money anymore to charity, and neither do companies.
For Kali, who lost his wife a few years ago, and many other helpless blind people, every day raises worries, but also the hope that someone could come to the rescue of the Johannesburg Society for the Blind. This would certainly save some of them from becoming destitute or beggars.
All right, so that was a look back in time, 1996, and that news anchor, of course, was Alice Chavanduka. All right, let's come back to the present day and our newspapers, and we don't have a lot of time, but let's start with the story that's captured the attention of all the newspapers, and it's a Democratic Alliance. Why have they taken over the front pages of the newspapers, William?
So for me, I think one of the best headlines about it is captured in Mondi Makanya's editorial piece. He talks let's make the DA white again, which it's just this extraordinary political story that I guess the only people who are feeling really happy about this are the ANC, because for once they're not on the front pages.
And they don't have to actively attack them, they're doing it themselves.
Yeah.
See ya?
Yeah, I like the front page of the Sunday Independent. I mean, there's an interesting take also along race lines where Herman Mashaba was saying that there's of racist elements, right-wing elements that's trying to retake the party. And if you look at the results from this elections, you know, they're more radical right-wing constituents were taken by VF+. So, you know, there's almost maybe a play to try and win back that arm, who knows. But it's an interesting story in this time and age where, you know, race is still an issue in South Africa, which we haven't dealt with properly.
Gosh. Okay, what other story grabbed your attention in the papers today?
I'm going to go with a tech one. It was in the Sunday Times.
Because that's your thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the world I love to live in. And there's this new company, Mortgage Me, which is trying to basically revolutionize how people apply for mortgages. So normally you can go to a single bank, but this app allows you to input your documents and get offers from all 4 banks. So it's disrupting
the banking. So the
banking.
banks come after you now as opposed to you chasing the banks.
Exactly. It changes the customer experience, which I think, you know, is something we need to be cognizant of. I mean, with the banks now, you know, shutting down branches, reducing their physical staff because, you know, everything's going online.
But my fear is that you have so much information that you input online that's accessible to everybody. What story grabbed you?
So there were a number, but I think one of them was the photo essay on Ugutomba that, and where they've been following a particular young girl, and they tell what her change to womanhood is like, and it's really nice because it gives a different angle to things, and it tells it through very, very visual images that are really powerful and just quite different and really interesting. You know, so if you're looking for something off the political margins, I thought that was particularly cool.
Wow. Gentlemen, you've been great guests. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. And let's see how these waters unfold for us in terms of this world of journalism. But thanks so much indeed for your insights.
Thanks for having us.
And for you at home, thanks very much indeed for watching Media Monitor. Please join us again next week at the same time for more of the same. And don't forget, hashtag SABC Media Monitor. We'd love to hear from you and get your thoughts on what you think. Have a great day and a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
But as far as old